Joe Burrow is being drafted at like pick 60 overall. Matthew Stafford's being picked 100 picks later, 100 picks later. Like if you're going to be somebody that not even maxes out Best Ball Mania, but if you're drafting 20 teams, you would be a fool not to do your best to get one team that has Puka, Adams, Stafford, and I'll even toss in there, Theo. When I do that every once in a while, I circle back with my very last round pick and I take Tutu Atwell too.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
We're talking underrated fantasy football players that could be steals at their current ADP. Theo Greminger for Fantasy Football Daily on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. Today, joined by my friend Andrew Cooper of Fantasy Alarm. We're going to jump right into it, Coop. No time to mess around. July right around the corner at the time we're recording this. Let's start out with one of your guys, and let's specifically start at the running back position, Kenneth Walker.
Dude, I'm all for Kenneth Walker here, and I'm actually all in on this entire offense. I know you've been drafting some JSN. Even I'll do a little Cooper Kupp too, because you got to understand what Clint Kubiak's bringing to the table, right? He took his offense and went to San Francisco and kind of matched minds with Shanahan, started using the fullback, right? Started using blocking tight ends. He brought that to New Orleans, and we saw early last year how successful it was early on, especially running the football, right? Alvin Kamara was on pace for his first 1,000-yard rushing season ever. He was 50 yards away when he got hurt. Obviously, he would have got those 50 yards over the last 3 games. But the guy that got the second most snaps in that backfield, besides Kamara, was Adam Prentice, the fullback. This year, Clint Kubiak's coming in. He brought Rick Dennison, the offensive line whisperer, with him. They drafted Gray Zabel in the first round. They drafted Robbie Oots, the big fullback, 270 pounds. Like, they're going to come in, and they're going to use a highly consolidated offense with the fullback and the blocking tight end. That's good for Kenneth Walker, obviously, because what the fullback does for the run game, you see it in Miami, you see it in San Francisco. But it's also good for those pass catchers because there's only going to be so many guys on the field that actually get the ball when you have, like Miami, Alec Ingold and Julian Hill and Durham Smythe. Those guys don't factor in. So it's going to be really good to consolidate that offense. And I think that they can turn this run game around. Offensive line can't be worse than it was last year. One of their guys retired in the middle of the season. Connor Williams retired during the season. They got to have more continuity this year.
Yeah, I mean, we used to podcast together every single week, Coop, and you were all over Clint Kubiak last year. I've been sort of all over him this offseason. Scott Barrett as well is on him. I don't need to really dive into Kenneth Walker because Scott Barrett and I had Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros on School of Scott this week, and we all are on the Walker train. We completely agree with you. He was the player that we came away that he was such a good 4th round value in a lot of these drafts. With your friend Dan Williamson and I, we took Kenneth Walker at the 310 in an FFPC main event. We started to pull him in there, and I think that's sort of where he's going to head this summer. Love that you talked about the use of the fullback. Seattle was bottom 10 in rushing yards per game in over the last 2 seasons. So people think about Seattle having running back production with Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, but it's been sort of despite the lack of rushing yards. I think with this new scheme, they're absolutely going to hit that. Kenneth Walker could have his big career year, was 16 points per game last year. We could see 18 points per game this year. That's really not that big of an ask. Absolutely, completely agree with you on that one. And for me, I'm going to talk about a running back being drafted a little bit higher than Kenneth Walker. But it's so funny. I've been podcasting with some people over the last few weeks, and there's some Achane faders, doubters, and possibly some Achane haters out there. Achane is a 2nd round pick. It's unbelievable to me that there's not more arguments to take him inside the 1st round. And I realize there's a ton of competition, but Christian McCaffrey steamed up. Ashton Genty was drafted. Absolutely, the volume's going to be there for Genty to support being a 1st round pick. Certainly, Derrick Henry is a huge value going around Achane, but just not enough is being made of what an upside Achane has. Last year in games with Tua Tagovailoa, he averaged 22.6 points per game, and he led all running backs in football in receptions. He didn't lead them in targets. That went to Alvin Kamara, but he led them in receptions. And with Tua, Achane averaged about 6 receptions per game. So could that number come in slightly with Tyreek Hill bounce back, Jalen Waddle bounce back? Maybe. But what if it doesn't? And what if Devon Achane has an even better season as a receiver? We saw the yards per rush attempt last year go down. What if it goes up? Because year one, he had one of the best rushing yard attempt averages in like the history of the game. This past year, it dropped to like 4.5, and people were like, "See, I told you it was unsustainable." Of course, 7+ rushing yards a game is unsustainable, but why can't Devon Achane, with his explosiveness, get that number back over 5? So for me, Devon Achane might be the lowest drafted player with a chance of being the RB1 overall. You can start your build out with a Jahmyr Gibbs. You could start your build out with a Ashton Genty, or one of the high profile wide receivers that we all like in round 1, and follow up with Devon Achane in the middle of round 2. To me, that could be an absolute cheat code, Coop. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I get some of the detractor arguments. I don't understand being a hater. Being a hater is a huge mistake, especially if
I
you're
kind of
somebody that
I kind of made it up for emphasis. There's
well,
not really haters out there.
no, I've seen some people that are just completely off. And like, if you play, Best Ball Mania, or you're going to max those out, you have to have some exposure to a guy with explosiveness like this. Like, there are people that, they're worried about Teron Armstead being gone, but, he was kind of getting up there, shadow of himself a little bit. People are worried about the team in general falling apart, but you got to look at this individual player, man. On top of the things you mentioned with the receptions, the reason I think that that's going to continue is that I went and looked at the last like decade of running backs that actually played meaningful wide receiver snaps, like running from a wide receiver spot. And there's a couple of big seasons, Tariq Cohen had one at one point. Christian McCaffrey does it a decent amount. But last year, Devon Achane, 168 routes from a wide receiver spot is the second most that we've seen since David Johnson in 2016 with like 178. I mean, like, you don't see a wide receiver 3 out there. They don't use Braxton Berrios. They basically go out there with 2 tight ends a lot of the times, or a fullback, and 2 wide receivers and Devon Achane. That's why the guy that was like 5th on that team in targets is Julian Hill. Like, he's not even a factor. You know what I mean? It's Jonnu, the 2 running back, the 2 wide receivers, and the running back. So Achane is going to be a meaningful part of that game, and he's got the explosiveness. So definitely in full PPR and best ball. Like, if you play standard, go ahead, take Derrick Henry, right? Any sort of PPR though, I feel like you got to be leaning into these guys that can potentially take over the entire role, and people worry about Jalen Wright or Ollie Gordon. There's very few there was only 2 running backs last year that played more than 80% of the snaps. Jonathan Taylor at 80 and Kyron Williams at 87. Nobody's playing all the snaps. As long as you're getting the meaningful touches, the pass downs, the goal line downs, then you can give up a handful of touches to whoever, right? Like, we don't worry about Tyler Algier having 600 yards because Bijan's awesome and he gets all the meaningful touches. That's going to be Achane. So I have no problem taking him in the second. And you know what? Early first, no problem either.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you could make a real argument that it's the 1-2 turn is where he belongs.
Right.
But I think with the Christian McCaffrey steam, Ashton Genty sort of entrenched, and then all of those appealing wide receivers, he's just going to continue living inside of round 2. And then you bring up Derrick Henry, where people are chasing. Like, I think Derrick Henry's a fine value where he's going, but at the end of the day, like, Derrick Henry is older, and he's going to have to rush for what he did last year. He's going to have to give you a 1,900 rushing yard season. He's going to have to come close to leading the NFL in rushing touchdowns if he finishes as the RB1 overall. Devon Achane just needs Miami's offense to get a little bit closer to what it was in 2023. Not like a insane ask, a little bit of a tall task considering their offensive line turnover, but we've seen the guy be one of the most explosive runners and now one of the best year 1 to year 2 receiving jumps. The guy's just a unicorn. And I'll say, like, I think that a lot of the faders still fall back to their priors where he's a smaller back. So they always have in the back of their mind that the low BMI back is unsustainable. I think that's sort of that's another reason where I think a lot of people head to head, it's just harder for them to dive into that profile if they haven't already. Let's keep this going. We talked about.
Before we move on, just real quick, Raheem Mostert was a smaller back, and he scored 20+ touchdowns on this team in the past. 100%. So I'm not worried about that one.
100%. And another back who was always not a bruiser, but has been absolutely a fantasy football ATM machine for his entire career. And another player who Scott, Debro, and I all agreed was a value where he's going is Alvin Kamara. Last year, you were all over Kamara at ADP. This is a player you were saying had RB1 overall potential. You took a lot of pushback on that one, Coop. But when the season started, Alvin Kamara gave you like a 40-pointer. Alvin Kamara averaged, 19 points per game last year. and finished as a easy RB1, was a huge value at ADP. You're seeing him as a huge value at ADP this year again inside of round 4.
Yeah, he was the RB1 through 6 weeks last year and the RB2 through 12 weeks, right? And then he ended up getting hurt towards the end of the season there. I mean, everyone got hurt. Eric McCoy got hurt. The entire team fell apart, right? But like, this is the player. I mean, you go in, and right now at this time of year, especially, you're thinking about closing line value, right? You kind of alluded to it earlier. You're taking Kenneth Walker at 310 because that's where you think he should go. You're taking Davante Adams every time in the second because you think this guy could end up closing as a first round pick, right? You look at the guys that win Best Ball Mania. Yeah, they have stacks. Yeah, they have correlations. And I have an article coming out on this exact topic, but they create so much value at closing value. The guy that won Best Ball Mania last year only picked 2 players that ended up being below their closing line ADP. And one of them was Ricky Pearsall, who got shot on August 31st and his ADP plummeted right before everything closed. You know what I mean? Like, this guy was picking players. He was getting his stacks, but he was getting them at the right price. Or if you earlier in the summer, if you draft guys that you think are going to move up, then you get value. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm looking at it. I'm saying, what happens every single year with some of these guys? Alvin Kamara, every year, this time of year, because of the hype and the steam on other players, he's picked to like RB16. And then week 1, before the week even starts, everyone's doing their weekly ranking and they rank him like what running back 8. And then he goes off and then everyone's got him in their top 5 for the rest of the year, as long as he's healthy, right? So this is a guy I'm all over. I don't care that Kellen Moore didn't throw to other backs. He already came out and said, this guy is a phenomenal feature back in this league. We're going to get him the ball however we have to. Obviously, we have an emphasis on running, but we're going to throw him the guy the ball a ton. He's the best player on the team. There's only 4 guys in the league at running back that have averaged over 100 yards from scrimmage for their entire career. 4, Theo. Christian McCaffrey goes in the first round, right? Jonathan Taylor goes in the first, second round. Saquon Barkley goes in the first round. Alvin Kamara is the 4th, and he goes in like the 4th, 5th round. I mean, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills with this guy. It's going to be fine. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about ways to find value at the running back position, and we did this dead zone running back episode on School of Scott. I keep referencing just because I recorded it yesterday, and I think a lot of it's relevant. There's ways to find value at running back. One of it is older players get faded. It's definitely an ageist position. Last year was sort of the perfect storm for all of the older guys scoring points. It won't be quite as good this year, but it's not like they're all going to fall off of a cliff. Another way to find running back value inside of like this dead zone area is backs who can catch passes. Kamara has both of those. He's going to catch a lot of passes. He is a guy who, even if the scoring regresses, Coop, he's still going to give you like 16 points per game. Another and this one's a little more dangerous because you can get left holding the bag. Another way to find values in fantasy football is to draft players from teams that no one wants to draft, because you see these collective ADPs for multiple players on the same team just shoot down. And every year we'll find a few offenses that after a month or so, we say this offense was very, very mispriced. Alvin Kamara definitely fits the bill because no one's stacking. A lot of it's like the underdog effect. Underdog sets the ADP market. Then it sort of like gets referenced in FFPC, NFFC, Sleeper, every single league, because people have that early best ball baseline ADP that they start off with. When there's no quarterback to stack with, and there's like nobody wants to correlate this particular team, then all those guys are a little bit different. So I would argue Kamara, based off what he did last year, despite his age, despite the trepidations about the offense, just like Walker, could be considered a 3rd round pick more so than a 4th round pick, but you're able to get him inside of the round 4 every single time. Absolutely love that one. Coop, we've podcasted together so many times. You're absolutely putting out fire content. Love podcasting with you. Love coming on your shows. Love having you on mine. You are working on a very cool best ball project these days. When's it going to drop and where can people find it?
Yeah, so it's a free article that's going to be coming out within the next day or so over at fantasyalarm.com. And basically, I've been seeing this trend, right? Where when you have these teams that win these big tournaments that have these stacks, sometimes they have like week 17, week 16 correlations. These are all great things, right? These are things that we want. But what I'm seeing is a trend of people reaching to get those stacks and reaching by a little too much, bleeding value. So basically, I'm going through and kind of showing some examples of how that can hurt you. And the short and sweet is this, Theo. If you're going to do something like underdog on Best Ball Mania, there's 672,000 teams in that, right? How many leagues is Joe Burrow going to get drafted in?
All of them.
All of them. How many teams is T. Higgins going to get drafted in?
All of them.
All of them. How many teams made it into the finals last year with stacks of T. Higgins and Joe Burrow? A lot. There are thousands upon thousands of stacks of these teams, of these guys. If you reach to get those stacks, all you're basically doing is putting out a worse copy of the stacks and the correlations that everybody's looking at. So if you go and actually look at teams like Pat Kerranes when he won, yes, he had the correlations. He was also in like the 90th percentile ADP bucket. The guy last year, I mentioned it on the show, the only two players he reached on above ADP that finished above closing line ADP were Ricky Parasol, who got shot, and Jermaine Burton, who was a non-factor. In fact, at one point in the draft, Theo, he already had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and he had an opportunity to take Joe Burrow at ADP, and he took James Conner because James Conner was up there on the board 3 rounds behind ADP. Then he got Burrow a round after. He got Brock Purdy with his correlation a round after. Guys like James Conner and Brian Thomas Jr. are how he made it to the final round, right? It wasn't necessarily the stacks. Stacks are how he won. But there were so many copies of similar teams. He managed to combine value with those other options. He didn't even have a single week 17 correlation. So I'm going in and I'm kind of trying to pump the brakes. It's kind of a balance here because I love watching teams, reach and do and make all these mistakes. But I'm trying to bring people back to the light on a little bit of value-based opportunity. And that's kind of what we're doing today on the show. We're looking at running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback. Where are the values at ADP where you can actually generate closing line value now and also include it with your stacks and whatever other correlations you want to have.
Now, an article like this, Coop, probably costs $50-$60. Do you have a discount code for people to read it for a little less?
Free, baby. For
Whoa.
you, Theo.
Whoa.
For you. This one's free. All my rankings and stuff, all the yin and yang tight end, that's on the draft guide, which is available now. That's for the members at Fantasy Alarm. And for anyone that just wants to buy a copy of the draft guide, that's updated all summer. This one's going to be free just because it's a pandemic here. The reaching for the stacks, Theo, it's getting out of control, dude. I have to do a public service to get this one out for free.
Love it. And I'll give you like I'm always promoting your stuff, but specifically whenever you drop like a strategy guide article, you do it for Scott Fishbowl. You've done it for all of the FFPC postseason contests, like, and now specifically best ball, like that. You're always putting out great work with that. You've also won a couple of awards. We can share that as well. FSWA Writer of the Year last year, Andrew Cooper, and I know you won a couple of other FSWA awards as well. So why don't you let everybody know about that one, Coop?
Oh, man, I hate that.
Drop it like it's hot. You know you don't hate it. Come on.
Go to my Twitter profile at Coupe Fiasco. I got them up there, but we won. We did good last year. We got I won Writer of the Year for football. I had the Article of the Year. That's on a Dynasty Trader. So go to Fantasy Alarm 3 books, fantasyalarm.com/3 books, 3 books for the Dynasty Trader. That one won, and then we won Radio Show of the Year for the Fantasy Alarm show. Can't take all the credit for that. Howard Bender, Jim Bowden, Josh Wagner, and Shane Blunt behind the glass every weeknight, Sirius XM, 6 to 8 p.m., channel 87. So good stuff last year. But hey, dude, that's last year. That's in the rear view, man. No one cares about last year. It's all about this year. Let's go.
And one running back this year that I'm surprised there's not a whole lot of steam for is Kaleb Johnson. Every time Mike Tomlin opens his mouth and starts talking about Kaleb Johnson, he's like effusive in his praise and just we'll say things that it's like he's trying to make people more excited about this player. A few days ago, he referenced Le'Veon Bell and Rashard Mendenhall in the types of backs that he sort of is comparing Kaleb Johnson to. Younger backs with more room to run in their profile and a ton of production. Like, he's talked about Kaleb Johnson with nothing but praise. We see Aaron Rodgers sign with Pittsburgh. We think the offense is going to be a little bit better with Rodgers behind center. There's not a massive amount of mouths to feed in Pittsburgh in general. And then if we specifically look at the Najee Harris role that on paper Kaleb Johnson should step into, that's a really good one. Every year Najee Harris had over 1,000 rushing yards. Every year Najee Harris had over 270 carries. So for me, it's like last year I think is getting people a little bit in trouble, where you get to like round 6, round 7, and people are leaning into a lot of these older running backs who have produced at a high level, and they're sort of continuing to chase that prototype, and they're a little less into the unknown upside pick. You also have the discount now with Kaleb Johnson, where it's become an ambiguous backfield. We didn't necessarily think this would be an ambiguous backfield, but it's one of the most ambiguous backfields in ADP because Caleb's running back 26, and Jalen Warren is running back 32. So it's one of the closest convergences of ADP. For this one, I've been a Jalen Warren guy for years where I think he's talented, but I don't think he's a player that's going to take on some outsized role that we haven't seen in previous seasons for him. Kaleb Johnson just has so much juice to the profile. Third round pick, could have been drafted higher. It was just a really good draft class for running backs where I think Kaleb, if it was last year's draft, probably would have been a second round pick. He's only 21 years old. He's got great size, and the college production was awesome. He had 1,500 plus rushing yards and 21 touchdowns last year at Iowa, finalist for the Doak Walker Award. Like, Kaleb Johnson had a lot of people who liked him. Brett Whitefield over here at Fantasy Points really liked him as a prospect. And it's like, people are just not excited about this. Coop, I'm in an FFPC slow main event where he fell into round 7 and he continues to do that. So you see him at like the late 6th, mid 7th. I think we're going to see him rise up as the summer moves along and people just get a little bit more aware of this is the guy you want in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and the thing is, we had a stretch there where like the third down backs on teams were kind of taking over the full role at certain points, and we were getting this crazy upside, like Kamara and Austin Eckler, and that kind of changed the narrative on that to make people think that you want the third down back. I encourage people to go check out Dathan Yonke over at PFF. He did a study on running back utilization. If you can get a guy that can take over the full role, whether he comes from the running side or from the passing side, then that's the biggest value. After that, the value is not even really split up between PPR and versus or half or standard. The guy that's the starting running back almost always gets the most touches. He almost always has the most RB1 weeks, almost always has the most consistency, right? In most cases, that's how it works out, especially if you have just this dedicated third down back. Go look at Derrick Henry last year. They had a dedicated third down back in Justice Hill that was playing on third downs, that was playing on passing downs, but they were good offense, and the starting running back got the bulk of the touches and put up crazy points, right? So that's a situation that Kaleb Johnson's going into. And I just want to remind people that I don't know what happened here, Theo, because going into the NFL draft, everyone's like, oh, best running back class is 2017, right? That's what everyone's saying. But the players didn't change. The draft went the way it did because of how running backs are devalued and because of how there were so many options. You were able to roll the dice and say, okay, we'll wait till the second round and take a guy here, or wait to the third or even the fourth round and we'll take a guy from this tier. But the running backs in this class still are better than the wide receivers from this class. Like, this could be a class where we look back and say, just like in 2017, where we had Christian McCaffrey and Leonard Fournette and Joe Mixon and Alvin Kamara and Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams and James Conner and like 5 other guys. Like, we could look back and be like, oh, wait a second, all these guys are good. But you're getting a discount on Kaleb Johnson and also Quinshon Judkins to a certain degree. But the difference between those guys is the Steelers have an actual quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. They have Arthur Smith that wants to use 17 different tight ends and move them around as move tight ends and fullbacks. Like, this guy could easily just walk in and just be better Najee Harris from day one. And at his ADP, I would take regular Najee Harris.
Yeah, it's funny. I made the exact same point this week, and I've made a couple of these points about how there's just not a lot of steam for the rookie class. It's like even Genty's at a palpable ADP where I thought Genty, like when he was drafted, you could have envisioned a scenario that you're drafting him at like rookie year Saquon Barkley, rookie year Zeke Elliott prices. He's actually closer to rookie year Najee Harris 1-2 turn prices than he was with those guys. Like, he's going about a little bit behind in a lot of these drafts where Bijan was going in his rookie season. So it's like and it's down the board. It's like Travion Henderson's at an interesting price. Omarion Hampton's at an interesting price. Kaleb Johnson, I would say your Quinshon Judkins argument was awesome. Like, those two should be flipped in ADP because Judkins also has Dylan Sampson behind him, much worse offense. Pittsburgh, like the offensive line, they put a lot into it last year. I completely agree. You're on another running back who's a younger one, but in this case, it's a second-year player that was a big disappointment last year, but this year is one of the more high-profile handcuffs in fantasy right now, Coop.
Yeah, and this is a guy, I'm looking at Trey Benson. And again, I don't like necessarily playing the handcuff game. I don't like handcuffing my own players, definitely not in best ball. But if you're going to play those games, you need to ask yourself, what unleashes these guys, right? Like, who is most likely to get hurt? And again, I'm not a Dr. Fortune Teller type guy, but we got a 30-year-old back here who's gotten hurt in every single one of his seasons so far in James Conner. And if James Conner doesn't hurt, he's going to get hurt. He's going to be a great value. But when I go and watch Trey Benson in these interviews, he doesn't sound like a guy who wants to play more. He sounds like a guy who's been told that he's going to play more. And he came out and said that he's been working out with James Conner, who's absolutely yoked, right? And he said that he's doing every workout that he does with him, and he's lifting all the same weights. He says that he's gone through every one of his clips last year, identified the spots where he was overrunning, where if he had a little more patience, he would have broken off big plays. Like, to me, this guy is poised to be the next big thing. And I think a lot of people, especially in your dynasty leagues, man, you can go out and get this guy for dirt cheap. I wouldn't be shocked if he did carve out a bigger role. I wouldn't be shocked if James Conner got hurt and he took over the entire role. And when you look around, there's only so many of those guys out there. I mean, if Derrick Henry gets hurt, do you really have a guy that's going to step up and be an every down back? Not really. Keaton Mitchell, Justice Hill, like a lot of these older guys aren't like, if Alvin Kamara gets hurt, Devin Neal, 7th round pick, Kendre Miller, there's not really that opportunity out there with the older backs besides Trey Benson. So I find myself clicking his name a lot in these early best ball drafts just because you never know what's going to happen. And that's a guy that I believe in. And I think that offense is actually going to surprise some people.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I would say that you could make an argument for both James Conner or Trey Benson at ADP. Conner's at like a decent range. You're getting him inside of like round 5, round 6, was 15 points per game every single year. But when you look at it, Trey Benson sort of is like potentially like a Zach Charbonnet was last year, where any week he goes in, he should have the exact same amount of volume. He's incredibly explosive. I mean, we both liked him a lot when he was coming out last year from Florida State and was a 3rd-round pick. People were taking him in the 1st round of rookie drafts. They were very enthusiastic about him. I mean, Benson was going like near guys like Brian Thomas, like Ladd McConkey in these rookie drafts. And then last year, it was Amari DiMercato beginning of the year, and then we started seeing Benson coming on over the second half of the year. I agree with you. I think this is a post-hype. This is a trust thing where I think they really fully trust him in this offense now. There's been positive coach speak, and you love to hear the confidence out of the player as well. And I'll get us started at the wide receiver. Wide receiver got a couple of interesting ones. The first player I'm going to talk about is Chris Olave. And Chris Olave, there's always like collective groans. There's always a couple of people like a little bit annoyed when you bring up a Chris Olave because there's been seasons where he's failed to deliver at like a really, really hyped up ADP. Has had injury concerns, specifically last year. The concussions really caught up with him. But when you look at New Orleans, same sort of argument with Alvin Kamara. People are treating this New Orleans offense like they're not going to score any points. Do I have concerns about Tyler Shuck being a good NFL quarterback or potentially Spencer Rattler? Sure. But I do have confidence in some of the talent of the skill position players and also just how consolidated this offense should be. It's a Kellen Moore offense, a offensive mind that we're pretty much believing in. Like Kellen Moore obviously did a good job with Philadelphia. When he was in the Los Angeles, we saw a massive season out of Keenan Allen. Obviously high-level production for Mike Williams when he was on the field as well. Then you go back to his work in Dallas. The wide receiver scoring was really, really strong. Obviously guys like CeeDee Lamb, but there's always wide receivers producing in Kellen Moore-led offenses. And even if it's a Tyler Shuck behind center, I still anticipate Chris Olave is going to get a very high target share. He's never had lower than a 23% target share in any season of his career, including his rookie season. He's always had a tremendous amount of air yards, and his profile, I think, is more static than Rashid Shaheed. Rashid Shaheed is a guy that I know you were on last year, and I also liked. Rashid Shaheed, though, for him to bounce back in this offense with a rookie behind center, that I'm not so sure about. He's obviously fine at his current best ball price tag because he's so cheap. But if one of these two is going to come out and be like a mid-level wide receiver 2, my bet would be on Chris Olave. I think when you also look at Olave, New Orleans extended him. So they have a lot of faith in Olave. And when you talk about coach speak, Kellen Moore has said he's going to be a huge part of the offense. And I'm still able to get Chris Olave at low-end wide receiver 3 prices. Currently, he's going off the board in these FFPC 350s as the wide receiver 35 or 36. That's just too low for Olave. If he stays healthy, he's going to obliterate that ADP. he's the kind of player that could finish 10 spots higher or more than that ADP, Coop.
Easily, dude. I mean, last year, and think about it. The Eagles, Kellen Moore's team last year, was dead last in pass attempts. And both their wide receivers missed 4 games, and they were wide receiver 20 and 27 because it's a highly consolidated setup. And the thing with Rashid Shaheed last year, the reason we loved him so much is because Kubiak used that consolidated offense, and he was going a lot cheaper. But it wasn't that we didn't like Olave more than Shaheed. It was just that Olave was going a lot earlier. This year, Olave is at such an easy price to get. And I will say, I love picking guys like this that have these like biases against them that don't always translate, right? Like, number one with Olave, people are worried about the concussions. People are worried about, it's so easy to forget that people wanted Davante Adams to retire. People wanted Davante Adams released by the Packers after 2 years. He had multiple concussions early on. Turned out 10,000 yards later that it's an injury that can potentially heal at times. And then as long as you're outside of a certain window, you're not more susceptible to getting them. Same with Brandon Cooks, right? Who's now a threat to Rashid Shaheed on the Saints, but not to Chris Olave. I mean, this guy, to me, his floor is to have the type seasons that we saw for years for Terry McLaurin with bad quarterback play, for a guy like Garrett Wilson with bad quarterback play. Can't really throw Andre Johnson's name out there because he's a Hall of Famer, obviously, but he never had a good quarterback, and he just continued to produce. Like, these guys, when you get that kind of target share, you're still going to get your 1,000 yards. You're still going to be good. The difference for a guy like Terry McLaurin is that when he actually got a quarterback, he went from scoring 5 touchdowns to scoring 13. Like Chris Olave, the worst case situation is that he comes out, he has his 1,000 yards, he has his big target share, only scores a couple touchdowns because the team isn't good. But what if Tyler Shough is good? What if playing college football for 75 years, he is actually ready to hit the ground running? We saw,
or what if he's just not awful? If he's
right,
just not awful and they're like the 20th highest scoring team in the NFL, not like we're asking them to, like right now, people are treating New Orleans like they're going to be the 32nd, like Cleveland and New Orleans are the two offenses that people are treating like they're not going to score points. These are the bottom two offenses. We're often wrong when we try to identify who is going to be the worst offense on the season.
right. Yeah, and you just got to fight back a little bit. Like the Browns last year were obviously brutal, right? But the volume kept their fantasy guys alive, but they were scoring like 15 points a game. The Saints and Panthers, these teams only won 5 games. And the idea of wins holds people back from the possibility that these teams can at least punch back. The Saints last year were punching back. The Panthers were punching back. The Chuba Hubbard had 1,400 yards from scrimmage. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Alvin Kamara was also an RB1. It's like you can have these guys from the bad teams if the offense can punch back. And I think this offensive line is going to be a little bit better again. Eric McCoy missed virtually the entire season last year. You got a good coach coming in. You still have the weapons around. I don't see why they can't at least fight in these games. The fact that the defense is bad and they're probably going to lose games, I don't really care about that as long as they're not flat out, straight up dog water. So it's entirely possible that this team can at least make the games entertaining versus some teams out there that I'm not sure what the plan is. The plan is probably to get the first pick,
Yeah, and I'll say for New Orleans, a lot of times when we see these teams that are complete disasters offensively, it starts up front with the offensive line. There's been nothing but positive reports out of New Orleans about this offensive line play this year. They drafted Kelvin Banks in round 1 this year inside of the top 10 overall picks. Kelvin Banks is a player that was unbelievable as a collegiate, started for like 4 years, for 3 years at Texas, was considered by some to be the best tackle in this entire draft class. And that's to combine with Talisi Fuaga, who last year they took in about the exact same range. So they have 2 premium top 10, top 12 pick offensive tackles. And then interior linemen, they have 2 or 3, Trevor Penning, Cesar Ruiz, guys like that a lot of these offensive line, people who are rating offensive line, I'm certainly not going to give you my offensive line ratings. Anyway, the Saints are going to have a tremendous offensive line as well this year, potentially. And if their offensive line takes a little bit of time to gel, then it's still going to be middle of the pack. It's not going to be a bad offensive line situation in New Orleans. So I'm on Olave at ADP, and I'll just keep going because I have more wide receivers listed than you do. Jordan Addison at wide receiver 38 might be even a better value than Chris Olave at wide receiver 36, because we see Addison falling into these insane ranges of the draft. So like Chris Olave, the latest we'll see him drop in like an FFPC league is like round 7. But occasionally with Addison, we see crazy things where he'll drop into round 8. And I just don't understand the Jordan Addison fading out there, where Jordan Addison averaged 13 points per game as a rookie. He averaged 14 points per game last year. He has 19 receiving touchdowns in only 32 games as a pro. 19 receiving touchdowns over your first 2 seasons in the league is tied for top 12 all time in NFL history. We're talking about a player who was a first round pick in the NFL draft, went 23rd overall in the 2023 NFL draft. He's only 23 years old, Coop. There's room to run in the profile. But when we go back with Addison, you're talking about a player who was all everything in college. He was first team All Pac-12, first team All ACC, and he also won the Biletnikoff Award when he was at Pittsburgh. Like, Jordan Addison is a elite level talent where people treat him like he's a boom or bust, like high end wide receiver 4. I just don't get that. And I also think that with Minnesota, the offensive ecosystem is so good. And I understand that, like, we can bring TJ Hawkinson into this. Like, Justin Jefferson's doesn't need us to talk about. He's amazing. Draft him inside the first round. But with Hawkinson and Addison, they're both sort of appealing at ADP, where one of them's going to be the number 2 target, one of them's going to be the number 3 target. But I think it's going to be very close for both of those guys. I think it's going to be consolidated. It's an offense that was able to hum even with Sam Darnold behind center, has sort of been quarterback proof. Now you get the X factor where it's JJ McCarthy, a player with athleticism and the ability to extend plays. Like, this offense could really take off this year, and there's a lot of appealing ADPs, but Addison's the one that's continually disrespected every single offseason.
Yeah, the one pushback I'll give on this is that it is fairly rare, historically speaking, to have 3 guys in the same team all get 100.
That's right.
We talk about that quite a bit. I personally would rank it Jefferson, Addison, Hawk. But you also have to add in that with these super highly consolidated situations, with nobody truly waiting in the wings, that when someone goes down, it really hyper focuses those targets. So you have a lot of outs with a guy like Addison. Like, he could just flat out be the number 2 target, and Hawkinson could be on the back burner, just like we see with the Eagles. Like, take the Eagles offense. You have AJ Brown and Devonta Smith at the top, and Dallas Goedert's waiting in the wings. When any one of those 3 players gets hurt, go and look at what the targets look like for the other guys. Even last year, when the wide receivers were hurt, Goddard went out and had that one hero game where he had like 150 yards and got like 12 targets. Like, you have so many outs with players like this that you have to also imagine what are the contingencies? What happens if Justin Jefferson does go down? What happens if TJ Hawkinson gets hurt? And if you go back and look at the teams that came close to or did have all 3 guys on the same team getting 100 targets, I usually look at Pro Football Focus is where I looked last for it. But the last team that did it was Kevin O'Connell's Minnesota Vikings. Yes, there was a little bit of an asterisk there because Hawkinson got traded to the team mid-season, but they were throwing the ball to Jefferson, Adam Thielen, and Hawkinson. So if I was going to pick a team to be there and actually get it done, I'd probably pick this team. So, I mean, the guy can also, obviously, like in the best ball streets, everyone knows that this guy can go out and have 150 yards and 3 touchdowns at any given moment. The only format that I would say that Addison's completely off my board would be something like fast draft, right? Where it's total season points, right? And he might miss 3 games if he gets suspended. That's where I take that guy off my board. Every other format, I don't care if he's suspended for 3 games. I'd much rather draft a suspended player than somebody coming off injury. Way less moving parts if the guy is healthy and missing games than if he's hurt and missing games.
From week 12 on last year for Addison had 2 games where he scored more than 30 points. Week 12, a 30-pointer against Chicago. And then week 14, that near 40-pointer against Atlanta. And then on top of that, he added a 19-pointer in the fantasy championship a week. So I'm with you. And then anytime we've talked about this before on pods, these guys with suspension concerns almost always turn into ADP values and not landmines. And Coop, if we draft well, we don't take zeros. You don't take a 0 in redraft. I'm not taking a 0 the weeks he's out. So maybe he'll get suspended. I don't draft scared, Coop. I don't draft scared.
You couldn't use him for the first 3 weeks last year. I will say this. I got to give this shout out. He came on our show, Jordan Addison did, on Sirius XM, Channel 87. And Howard Bender straight up asked him. He's like, should we use you this week in fantasy? He's like, you better. That was the week he went out and had 130 plus yards and 3 touchdowns against the Falcons. So anybody that was listening to that, making their DFS lineups, they're on the Jordan Addison train.
Shout out to Jordan Addison, continually disrespected, but never on this show. Talk about your wide receiver. There's been a lot of hype from people at Fantasy Points, including Scott Barrett and a lot of other fantasy analysts that I respect that are on the Josh Downs train. Josh Downs has started to steam up, but you're on another Colts wide receiver, a blast from the past, Michael Pittman Jr.
Yeah, and blast from the path. The guy's 27 years old.
I
Right?
know. We're talking about the 35. This was
I
2023 numbers, you know?
I love Michael Pittman in Dynasty. I love Josh Downs in Dynasty. I wrote an article last year talking about the path that these guys take as slot wide receivers that get a bigger role. In the article, I mentioned Josh Downs. I mentioned JSN. JSN got that path. He surpassed Tyler Lockett to be an every down player. You look at guys like CeeDee Lamb as a rookie, played 94% of his snaps from a slot spot, and then because they had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. The next year, when he was a full-time wide receiver, it was wheels up. Chris Godwin stuck behind Deshaun Jackson, stuck behind Mike Evans. Year 3, finally gets a full-time role, laser show, wide receiver 2 overall. So we want to look for these hyper-efficient guys. You guys, you look at the stats with the separation stats with you guys. You look at the route success rates with Matt Harmon. He checks all those boxes. The concern I would have is this for Josh Downs for the short term is that, one, a lot of those separation, because he pretty exclusively plays the slot. He only had 6% of his snaps last year come in 2 wide receiver sets. The rest were basically all in 3 wide receiver sets. Because of how much slot he plays, it is easier to get separation going against nickel corners. He's not often going against either of the top 2 corners on the other team. You're not seeing Josh Downs going up against Trent McDuffie and Christian Gonzalez, right? That maybe those scores can be a little inflated, just like we see with the running backs that only play on third downs. Their metrics can be a little inflated against light boxes and things like that. But the guy's a tremendous player. We're hoping that he can graduate to being a full every down player, Josh Downs. The problem I run into is last year, Michael Pittman got hurt and missed a game. He did not take over that role. Adonai Mitchell did. Another game, Alec Pierce got hurt. Josh Downs played 58% of the snaps in that game. Adonai Mitchell played 90. Like they're hesitant to make this guy an every down role. And I know they can probably run enough 3 wide receiver sets to make it happen, but no team is running 3 wide receiver sets at 95% of the snaps. When I look at a guy like Michael Pittman, this is a guy who is the captain of the team. He's a split end. He's out there every single snap, sometimes playing 100% of the snaps. And over the past few years, this guy's averaged 8-9 targets a game. Last year, he breaks his back. He fractured his back and found out that he could play through the injury with a fractured back, and he did so. Ended up having 111 targets, even playing through a broken back. Josh Downs had a toe injury, and he said, I almost sat out a game with a toe injury, but how am I going to sit out when this guy's playing? So, guy, absolute big-time motivator. And with the bad quarterback play that he's had, right? This guy was wide receiver 13 the year before last, with Gardner Minshew throwing for under 200 yards a game, right? Daniel Jones, his career average is 208 yards a game. That's 3,500 yards. Even if he's just his career average type player, that's 3,500 yards, which is what Jaden Daniels threw for 3,500 yards. Jalen Hurts last year threw for under 3,000. Like, it doesn't take much to have a decent quarterback come in, and this guy that's been an every snap player, been a target hog player. Now he's healthy, healed from this broken bone. It's not a disc. It's not a muscle issue. It's a broken bone that is now healed. We're not fading anybody that broke a rib last year and played soft because they were dealing with pain. This is a guy that could easily go right back to being a guy that gets 130, 140, 150 targets at the age apex for wide receivers, 27 years old, and he's being drafted at wide receiver 50. A lot of the pushback I get, Theo, is because people think that you still have to draft him at wide receiver 18, where he was drafted last year. Wide receiver 50. You can draft your entire starting lineup. 3 wide receivers, 3 running backs, a quarterback, a tight end, another player, and then take Michael Pittman, and he could be the top wide receiver on his team like he's been every year in targets.
You make such a good argument for Michael Pittman, and I've been trying to sort of adjust my priors on Pittman where I want to add a little bit more best ball exposure to him because there's some smart people like yourself making this exact same argument. And I think when also you look at Michael Pittman, this is a player that Indianapolis treated like an alpha wide receiver. He headed into free agency and they bottled him up. They signed him in March. So they gave him his extension, and it was a 3-year, $70 million contract. This is about the same amount of money that Houston gave Nico Collins, that Miami gave Jalen Waddle. And this was $46 million in guaranteed money. Michael Pittman's going to make $23 million this year, and it might be more than that. I believe it's $23 million. So let us know in the comments if Theo, you got that one wrong by like 300,000, dude. But Michael Pittman, like if we just go back to 2023, the guy was excellent. And I think that I've made the argument that there's more target competition, Tyler Warren, Josh Downs. But like you said, at the wide receiver 50 price tag, Michael Pittman could end up being a low-end wide receiver 3, a guy who's in your flex spot at times, and he's still a huge win considering the ADP price. People are sort of leaving him for dead right now. So I'm going to adjust my priors a little bit on Pittman. I really, really like that call, Coop.
Right. And here's the thing. There's a fallacy, right? They call it the false choice or false dilemma fallacy. And this is lowering the ADP of both Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. And we saw it for years with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, where it was this fake choice that you were told like, oh, you could only do this or you can only do that. If you like Josh Downs, you have to hate Michael Pittman. And that's not the case. The upside case for Josh Downs is that he gets more snaps, that he gets a better role, right? And in that case, what you would have is for 3 wide receiver sets, Josh Downs plays in the slot. And then for 2 wide receiver sets, the field stretcher, Alec Pierce, comes out of the game. And we know that they're willing to do that because if you go back to the early years for Alec Pierce, Zach Pascal was playing in every snap role where he primarily played slot and then moved out for 2 wide receiver sets. That's the true upside case for Josh Downs, where he would absolutely hit the moon. That's what we saw with JSN, with CeeDee Lamb, with Chris Godwin. That doesn't affect Michael Pittman. Just like when Chris Godwin hit his upside case, it didn't affect the split end Mike Evans. Mike Evans maintained his role and continued to have 1,000 yards year after year after year. The upside case for Josh Downs, the real choice is Downs versus Alec Pierce or Downs versus Tyler Warren. Those are the real choices. Michael Pittman, there's no world where they take their big 6'4", 250-pound split end and say, hey, you're not going to play in two wide receiver sets because we got to get the 5'7", 171-pound Downs out there. It's the flanker versus the slot guy. The Michael Pittman's role is not under threat at all. If it was under threat, wouldn't we have seen him lose snaps last year when he had a broken back? He didn't.
Yeah, no, I think you make an unbelievable case for Michael Pittman. I'll keep my next one pretty short and sweet because, again, this player is not being like disrespected in ADP. It's Davante Adams, and Davante Adams is one where I think he's just being mispriced in the sense that this profile in this offense should be a player that you draft at the 2-3 turn, not necessarily a guy that's falling into the end of round 3. And what's interesting with Pittman is going behind Terry McLaurin. He's never been outscored by Terry McLaurin in any season of his career. Last year, Davante Adams averaged over 17 points per game on 2 bottom 8 offenses. He had 1,000 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, 85 receptions in only 14 games played. And again, doing that for the Jets and the Raiders. It's sort of your Alvin Kamara argument where I think people are less enthusiastic about Davante Adams because he's 32 years old. But there's nothing in this profile that screams regression. In fact, the scoring in the second half of the season was awesome. 17 points in week 13, 26 points in week 14, and then a 43-point week in week 15 to get the fantasy playoffs started. Another 20 points in week 16. So Davante Adams is playing at an extremely high level. It's an offense that we saw was very consolidated target share between Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp for a large period of time last season. I think we'll see the exact same thing. Davante Adams, again, going behind Terry McLaurin. He's also going behind Tyreek Hill, who he scored 5 more points per game than last season. Davante Adams is just a great value where he's going. End of third round, Davante Adams. You reference like the Joe Burrow, T. Higgins. We could see like a Matt Stafford, Davante Adams team in the Best Ball Mania finals.
You took the words out of my mouth. He's one of the quarterbacks I wanted to talk about today. When I draft Puka Nacua in the first round, I just cross my fingers that Davante Adams is going to be there in the third round because I think that's going to be a Best Ball Mania final day type stack. Because if you look at where Jamar Chase goes in the first round and where T. Higgins goes at that 2-3 swing, right? And then you look at where Puka Nacua goes in the first round and where Davante Adams goes in the third. Joe Burrow is being drafted at like pick 60 overall. Matthew Stafford's being picked 100 picks later, 100 picks later. Like if you're going to be somebody that not even maxes out Best Ball Mania, but if you're drafting 20 teams, you would be a fool not to do your best to get one team that has Puka, Adams, Stafford, and I'll even toss in there, Theo. When I do that every once in a while, I circle back with my very last round pick and I take Tutu Atwell too. Because if one of those guys goes down, Tutu Atwell is now in that Demarcus Robinson role where he's already playing a huge snap share. He could see some extra points. And when you look at the teams last year, it didn't pan out the way everyone thought. But last year, 4 of the teams in the top 10, Theo, had Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Jermaine Burton. They were prepared for that type of situation. Burton just totally disappeared. Atwell, we've seen him go out and get 10 targets a game. So I'm going out and I'm stacking those up. If you want to compete with me, you got to go out and get those guys at value now. And Matthew Stafford is the easiest pick to make ever if you get Puka Nacua and Davante Adams, because you don't really lose any value at that part of the draft reaching by one round. We're talking about round, what, 14?
Yeah, and also like Matt Stafford, he's going at the QB2, QB3 line. You're able to get him as QB. Like, so if you're talking about your best ball strategy, you're able to get Matt Stafford in a 3 quarterback build as your QB2. You could go like Matt Stafford and Cam Ward, Matt Stafford and Geno Smith. There's so many things you could do. You can really like build a really fun 3 quarterback build and really attack those premium wide receivers, premium running backs, even get a high level tight end. So I really like your Matt Stafford call here, Coop.
You can build a miniature. I've actually done the exact same thing you talk about, where I take Stafford and Cam Ward, and then I build a miniature because it's so easy to get after you take Cam Ward, somebody like Chigakonkwo, Tyler Conklin, Eli Ayamanar.
Yeah,
Like
18th round Iamaner is like super easy right now, and he's going to start.
It's free real estate. There's one guy, Calvin Ridley, and then we don't know. So you can get such a cheap back. The fact that it's a back stack with Cam Ward going where he goes, it's like I'm ending my drafts with a lot of that correlation. It's not that hard to do.
All right, Coop, let's talk about your guy. You know, I don't know if they know about this, but you're a Boston guy, and there's a reason to be excited for a couple of Patriots this year. But Drake Maye could really be the one. Incredibly exciting player. We talked about him on School of Scott. Continues to sort of chill at QB 14, QB 13, QB 15, despite the immense rushing upside that he has.
Right. And I do a little bit of, I don't know if the right word for it is like arbitrage, but I try and find like ways to get access to discounted versions of players that I like. Right. So you look at last year, a guy like Jaden Daniels came out, ran a ton, threw for 3,500 yards, 25 touchdowns, which, that doesn't really blow your mind, but the rushing was what put him over the top. You look at a guy like Josh Allen. Like Josh Allen also only threw for like what, 3,700 yards. It was the rushing that put him over the top. So when I go through and I look at Josh Allen's stats last year, a guy like Bo Nix, those stats are very similar, right? Like they threw for virtually the same. I mean, Bo Nix actually threw for another touchdown, more touchdowns, and he threw for very similar yards per game. It was the fact that Josh Allen scored 12 rushing touchdowns and Bo Nix scored 4. That's the difference between those players. So I get to that range, and then I'm going down and I'm looking at Bo Nix's numbers versus Drake Maye's. I mean, Bo Nix ran the ball 92 times for what, 430 yards? Drake Maye ran the ball 54 times for 421 yards. Like he was incredibly efficient with his rushing. People are underestimating the fact that his 40 time is very similar to someone like Jaden Daniels. This guy's absolutely willing to run. He has Josh McDaniels coming in. Say what you will about him as a head coach, but this guy has won many, many rings and orchestrated absolutely ridiculously efficient and awesome seasons. That was obviously with Tom Brady, but Tom Brady at times with an island of misfit toys. They got Stephon Diggs coming in. Derrick Henry is a touchdown threat. Travion Henderson is now hopefully going to be there. The ceiling would be like a Jahmyr Gibbs, Alvin Kamara type, but worst case, you're getting to James White. What happens when you throw the ball to James White 78 times, 110 times like they have? The quarterback gets all those stats. All those stats. That's why Drew Brees was so great for all those years, because the run game was throwing the ball to Alvin Kamara, and Drew Brees got all those numbers. So we could see him come out, Drake Maye, and be this year's Bo Nix, be this year's Jaden Daniels, and he's doing it at QB 15. In your redraft leagues this year, if you wait on quarterback and you draft somebody that you consider to be boring, right? Like even a Baker Mayfield, but like a Jared Goff or a Brock Purdy, and that's your starter, use a bench spot on Drake May, who's going outside the top 12 quarterbacks easily, and just see if you can catch lightning in a bottle. That's how we got Jaden Daniels last year. That's how we got Lamar Jackson his rookie year. It's okay to draft two quarterbacks. And in your super flex and your best ball leagues, I don't have to tell you why a guy who's capable of running the ball over 100 times, the floor for that guy is QB1. Almost always has been. If you run the ball 90 times, you have to go out of your way to not be a QB1 in fantasy football.
Yeah, and Coop, I'll just ask you this. Who's going to have more rushing yards this year, Kyler Murray or Drake May?
Honestly, Kyler, I was going to say Drake May, but Kyler just came out and said that he wants to run the ball more this year. I think they could be very similar, but we're talking about the QB8 in ADP versus
QB8 versus the
QB15.
QB14. And I would say
And again,
I'd say it's a coin flip. I'd say it's a coin
it's
flip between the
close.
two rushing yards.
Right. The guy ran for 421 yards, and go back and like don't watch the games because I watched the games and they were painful. But just go back and just look at some of the game scripts. Those were nightmare games. Those are nightmare games. He didn't even start the season, obviously. He comes in off the bench. So he gets knocked out of one of the games as well with a concussion scare. Like this guy played not even close to a full season. And when you look at what, the path he could be on as a guy that runs for 600, 700, 800 yards. I mean, we've seen quarterbacks that are flat out bad, quarterbacks that flat out get benched and cut, having QB1 seasons because they're willing to run. I've seen Tyrod Taylor have a QB1 season. I've seen Vince Young have a QB1 season. Marcus Mariota, Daniel Jones. The willingness to run is so valuable in fantasy. It's virtually all that matters for some of these guys.
Yeah, and also you have to think like with the Patriots coaching staff, there's going to be a lot of design runs and the potential that Drake May is heavily utilized inside the 5-yard line and on the goal line, like we saw with Josh Allen. It was sort of a let's draft our Josh Allen here. They had a huge offer from the Giants in terms of they could have gotten this year's first round pick and last year's number 6 overall pick, which turned out to be Malik Neighbors, to trade down from Drake May. They stood pat. So I think this year Drake May's a great value. I completely agree with you. This is one where he's really fun. And I think like when we look back at the college rushing production, before Omarion Hampton like took over at UNC, Drake May led them in rushing yards. And alongside Omarion Hampton, and Hampton was 1,500 plus rushing yards, Drake May had like 9 rushing scores, nearly 500 rushing yards next to a first round running back. So like I think Drake May's a really, really strong recommendation. And one for me at the quarterback spot, like you brought up Stafford on the low end. We talk about Drake May also on the low end. Another player who's sort of living in high-end QB2 range is Brock Purdy. And he's right on the border. He's QB 13. But when we look at Brock Purdy's been consistently good on a points per game basis. He was QB 6 in points per game in 2023. QB 10 in points per game last year. Now he's being drafted as QB 13. I think that Brock Purdy's got some room to run in this profile. We saw the rushing yardage last year go up. He had 323 rushing yards and 5 rushing scores, which was a little bit out of character compared to what we saw from him his rookie year, where the rushing yardage was like non-existent, didn't run at all. So he's really seems comfortable. And we saw this big contract awarded to Purdy this offseason, but people still like, they're not that enthusiastic to draft him. Coop, he's 25 years old. He's incredibly efficient as a passer. He has a 30 touchdown season 2 seasons ago in 2023. Gets back Christian McCaffrey this year. You referenced Ricky Pearsall. There's a lot to like about this wide receiver room. I understand that there's turnover, but last year we saw Juwan Jennings take a huge step forward. Ricky Pearsall, there's some steam and buzz there. You've got guys like Jacob Cowing, then Demarcus Robinson that the beat reporters are on. George Kittle is still George Kittle. And then Brandon Ayuk sounds like he could be back October, end of October, something a lot like November. So the weapons are going to be there for Purdy. The offensive line play is going to be better this year. And he's just living in QB2 land. I think with Purdy and with May, you could make an argument that the high-end QB2 range players really have just as much of a good range of outcomes as sort of the low-end QB1s.
Yeah, and the thing with Purdy is that the people still dwell. Again, we talked about it earlier. Some of the biases that people have against players. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he's not a good leader. Oh, he was the last pick in the NFL draft. Like, people think that this is just a system guy. But like even as a Patriots super fan and a Tom Brady super fan, I'm willing to admit that early in his career, Tom Brady was a system guy, that he got a lot of help from the defense, that he also his rookie contract helped out a lot, right? It helped build these teams, right? Like, but then when you look at the metrics, it was there all along. That the completion, from everything from the yards per pass attempt and the big time throws and the completion percentages and everything you go through on Tom Brady was all there. Well, there's no statistical argument against Brock Purdy. I very rarely see any. It's all narrative based. It's all, oh, Shanahan could make anybody a good quarterback, this and that. Nobody ever pulls up the stats and says, here on this chart, look where Brock Purdy is. Because every time you look at the chart, he's up in the top right corner, right? Like every one of the efficiency metrics, like Brock Purdy is a good distributor of the football.
Downfield passes. I mean, he hits on so many metrics. If you go to Fantasy Points data and you pull up Brock Purdy, like there's so much to like. It's not the only argument would be like Shanahan's going to run the football. They're going to have balance. He's not going to get the overwhelming amount of pass attempts, but you could also make an argument. It's sort of like the George Kittle targets where it makes them way more efficient. The use of the run game and sort of to open up the passing game in San Francisco. Maybe the efficiency would take a step back if they went full on pass attack. I'm not quite sure, but I just know that Brock Purdy, like the chances of him finishing as QB 13, I think he's more likely to finish as a QB 7 than like the QB 13, QB 14.
Good teams. The thing about the fallacy of the good teams being too good to throw the ball enough is not really a huge problem. It is if you're drafting Patrick Mahomes at QB3, you know what I mean, and then they don't throw it as much, and he ends up being QB 8, 9, 10, whatever it is. Like, but a guy like Brock Purdy, 2 years ago, this team was dead last in pass attempts in the entire league, right? Dead last in pass attempts, but they were super efficient. They were passing to the running back. George Kittle was scoring the touchdowns through the air, and this guy was QB7, right? Like anyone that had Jalen Hurts last year, were you that upset about the way the season went? Like he only threw for 2,900 yards. They threw the fewest attempts of any team in the league. Were you upset to have Jalen Hurts last year? Of course not. So for me, like Brock Purdy, he's going to be just fine. Super highly consolidated offense also allows you to stack those guys easily. I will say I do like taking Juwan Jennings, man. I'll take Juwan Jennings.
I love Juwan Jennings. I mean,
love him,
he's fantastic value. Kittle's a great value in non-tight end premium. Kittle's fantastic. And then I like taking shots on some of the other wide receivers as well. Like it's just a very well-priced offense to have success. And to your argument, 2023 stats had the fewest pass attempts of any team in football, but he was 5th in passing yardage, had over 4,280 passing yards. He also was 9th in red zone attempts. And when we go a little bit further down into the metrics, like, first of all, 3rd in passing touchdowns despite the lack of volume, and the efficiency, number 1 in yards per attempt, number 1 in adjusted yards per attempt. I mean, just checks off so many, a 3rd in fantasy points per dropback. So like for me, Purdy checks off a ton of boxes.
Right.
Love it. And Coop, we talked about every position here. You usually get typecasted on a lot of these channels, but not here on Fantasy Points. We know you are well-rounded, but your reputation is tight ends. You write the yin and yang tight end article, which is just fire every single week. And, you're sort of known as one of these tight end gurus. Like people will say, I said this years ago before you like blew up. I was like, Andrew Cooper is the Matt Harmon of tight ends. And now it's like, is Matt Harmon the Andrew Cooper of wide receivers? I don't know, because you're blowing up, my man.
But I don't know if I go that far.
I know you didn't want to talk about tight ends. You didn't even want to talk about them. You said, I'm tired of being typecasted. Theo, don't do this to me, but you got to drop 2. I need 2 tight ends from you that are underrated right now.
It's so funny. Everyone knows me knows I'm the complete opposite, and people will do that. Theo, they'll be like, "Oh, let's do something else because you don't like talking tight ends. You're tired of talking tight ends, dude."
No, we've had full on. And like
you came on
this channel and you did a full tight end episode with me like 2 months back. I'm sure we'll do that again. But yeah, you could talk about whatever, my man.
Well, that's the thing though. It's like being a chef, and you're like your main thing is steak, but you obviously eat other foods. So like you do like talking about them, but ask me about steak because that's where I have all the most takes. Like tight end is where I have the most takes, no question. And there's a lot of people out there that I respect in this industry that do tight end work as well. I'll give a shout out right now, Daniel Williamson. He is part of, in my opinion, part of the brotherhood of tight end whisperers, along with Howard Bender and a few other guys. So shout out to
We
Dan.
throw one. I'll throw one more into your mix. We had him on School of Scott. Max Toscano
Yeah, I
has
like
done
Max a lot.
a lot of good tight end stuff recently.
Yeah, I'm still trying to. I'm still waiting in line to see if I can get on with you and Scott, dude. We'll have to see.
We got to get you in the mix. We got to get you in
Yeah,
the mix.
but yeah, Max does a great job, especially with scheme. I love that he really dives into people can enjoy Max's stuff even if they don't play fantasy football because he does a lot of that like video stuff, the scheme stuff. He does a good job. So shout out to Max for sure. But yeah, there's a lot of good tight end stuff out there, but we still deploy our yin and yang tight end to great success. And where it really thrives is as you mentioned, guys like George Kittle, guys like Mark Andrews, maybe not as good in tight end premium. If you play on like FFPC, you really should lean into the philosophy of the yin and yang tight end. Definitely, there's an article I put out every year, What Makes an Elite Tight End. You can pull up the metrics on that and decide for yourself. But basically, the short and sweet is that going back to 2020, 2003, so like 20 plus years, every top 5 tight end has had either 90 targets or 10 plus touchdowns. And the guys that have 10 plus touchdowns are so hard to find. The only guy in the league right now that has had multiple seasons of 10 plus touchdowns is Travis Kelce. Everybody else has had only one. It's pretty crazy that it's just so hard to predict, So even Mark Andrews only had one. It's a hard metric. So we go after the targets. So we're looking for guys that are athletic and are top 2 targets on their team. And when I go and look through, I don't see why a guy like Evan Engram can't come out and be the Joker, right? He can't come out and be that top 2 target along with Cortland Sutton this year. And even if it is highly consolidated among him and Sutton and RJ Harvey, that's not going to stop him, just like it didn't stop Sean Payton, teams from years past. And the thing about Engram that I love is that he has a stigma on him. It's kind of coming off as we get farther away, but so many people look at players if they get released or they get traded and they say, this guy must be bad. But the reality is that Liam Cohen doesn't use this type of tight end. He uses a two-way inline tight end in his offense, just like the Rams, just like the Falcons. They don't have a big slot role for tight ends because the main wide receiver plays out of the slot. Chris Godwin, Cooper Kupp. This year it's going to be Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter mixing in there. They looked at the big slot tight end and said, we do not use that in our scheme. We're getting rid of it. Teams do it all the time on defense when they switch from like a 3-4 to a 4-3 and they say, hey, we don't need a nose tackle. So we're going to release a good player because we don't use it. Like that's what happened here. They don't use the player. They got rid of him. Christian Kirk as well. We don't need that slot guy. We use a big slot type wide receiver here. So they moved on from him. And the perfect landing spot came around with a guy that uses a wide receiver, a tight end like a wide receiver, has done it to great success with guys like Jimmy Graham. He tried it last year with Devon Vele and Lil Jordan Humphrey and Lucas Kroll and Greg Dulcich and all these misfit toy players that just couldn't do it. He tried it. It didn't work. Now they brought in the guy that's going to do it. Evan Engram, wheels up. And we know he's going to play that Joker role because he tweeted a gif like goddamn Joker, Theo. I mean, like, where do you think he got that idea? Sean Payton said, here's what we're going to do with you. And he said, that sounds great. Let me tweet that out.
Yeah, I mean, Evan Engram is steamed up, but I think steamed up for a reason. And when we look at Denver, it's really hard to imagine that he's not the number 1 or number 2 target there. And when we talk about Cortland Sutton, like I like Sutton this year, but Sutton, we saw sort of a peak outcome in terms of his usage last year, a peak outcome in terms of his targets. I think if Sutton hits his same target share as last year, huge win for Cortland Sutton managers. More likely than not, it's going to be a little bit more of a balanced offense. But Evan Engram in that role, I think it's justifying the ADP. I'll share a very similar player to Evan Engram, but a little bit cheaper in ADP. We keep talking about these ugly, beat-up offenses. And I think the best tight end value on the board right now is not Evan Engram. He's a really good one. But the best tight end value on the board is David Njoku. And Coop, you talk about this all the time where it's identify these tight ends that are going to get 90 plus targets, identify the tight ends that are going to be the number 1 or number 2 target on their team. It's just a super simple way to look at the position that gives a lot of people problems. And when I look at David Njoku, much like Evan Engram, I would be completely shocked if he's not a top 2 target in Cleveland. You're talking about a player in David Njoku, and this is sort of like when you look at the tight ends that have earned the most targets over the last 2 seasons. Travis Kelce has 254 in 31 games played. Trey McBride has 253 in 33 games played. But the number 3 highest target earner at the tight end position is David Njoku, who, despite playing only 27 games, 6 fewer than Trey McBride, he has 220 targets over his last 27 games played. He is an absolute target magnet. And Coop, we could potentially have Joe Flacco, David Njoku, the sequel. And back in 2023, this was the biggest fantasy cheat code. This was the league winner, was your guy Evan Engram and my guy David Njoku in that fantasy playoffs where you needed one of those two guys. Njoku had 4 straight top 4 weekly tight end finishes. Every single game, he scored at least 16 points. And then he added another 16 points in that playoff loss to the Houston Texans. So, like, Njoku has so many outs here to return value. He's criminally underrated. You're getting him at tight end 12 on Underdog, and FFPC goes somewhere between tight end 9 and tight end 12. He could have his best season as a pro. I like Jerry Jeudy. I'm not anti-Jeudy, but Jerry Jeudy was not a 25% target share guy. He was like a 23% target share guy. And the number 2 target at the wide receiver spot, Cedric Tillman, who was really good, but for like a month. This is an offense that's going to have to lean on David Njoku, despite the presence of Harold Fannin Jr., who they drafted in round 3. Fannon's going to be one of the youngest tight ends in football this year. Whatever they get out of Fannin is sort of going to be a positive, and they could also be in 12 personnel an absolute ton, but it's going to be a ton of David Njoku. I love him this year.
Yeah, it's so funny just watching the fallacies. Maybe I'll do an article on fallacies this year.
Do it.
Maybe that'll be the one.
Let's rework the word. It's not good SEO. Nobody's searching the word fallacy. You got to come up with something.
No. Every year I'm allowed one article that has no SEO benefits, that has no SEO keywords that we chase the awards with. I think that might be the one this year. I think that might be
Let's
the
do
one.
it.
Fantasy fallacies, bro. I think that's what we're going for, because again, the false choice comes up again where people think, oh, you don't, because Jerry Jeudy is going to get targets, this guy's not going to be bad. That David Njoku can't get enough. The reason we say top 2 is because the number 1 tight end season of all time was Rob Gronkowski on a team where Wes Welker got 173 targets. So as long as you're in that top 2 range and you get your 100 targets, ideally 110, 120, it's not a problem. We see it all the time with wide receivers where we have no problem drafting Jamar Chase and T. Higgins because we think they're both going to get 125 plus targets if things go according to plan. Well, why can't we do that with a wide receiver and a tight end? Last year, Marvin Harrison Jr. got 117 targets. Wasn't a problem for Trey McBride, who got 147 and missed a game. And then I'll have people arguing that, okay, you're rushing out the best case scenario with Joe Flacco and David Njoku and the amount of targets that this guy's getting. Like, he's not going to get 12 targets a game like he was getting. Last year without Joe Flacco, he got 97 targets in only 11 games. That was tied for 6th in the league despite only playing 11 games. Like, what we're doing here is we're not saying he's going to get 15 targets a game. We're shooting for the stars, and you at least land with the clouds with a player like this. He might get that many targets a game, but he doesn't have to. Like, this guy, if they didn't fall for the Austin Hooper volume trap years ago, this guy would have broken out years ago. He would have been a household name. They got tricked into paying Austin Hooper a bunch of money, and that set this guy back. But David Njoku is awesome. So I have no problem going out and taking a guy like this at his ADP. In fact, for the first time ever, Theo, my strategy is almost always either try and get a good discount on the top guy or go with late guys. This year so far, if the ADPs hold, I'm drafting guys in the back end, tight end 1 range, which you know I never do.
I brought this up on another pod the other day that I agree with you. I've said that it's a rare year where the back end tight end 1s are really, really hitting. And then you don't necessarily see the, Laporta's a good example. Like, we were on Laporta when he was a rookie, and neither one of us were like, Laporta's going to be the tight end 1 overall, but we both discussed drafting Sam Laporta regularly. We both had exposure to him his rookie season. And in Dynasty, I had an absolute ton of Laporta.
Yeah.
I still do. But Laporta was a guy you were able to get like tight end 14. You're not necessarily seeing that. Like, Loveland and Warren go ahead of where Laporta went. So that the high-end tight end 2 range guys are a little bit less appealing than some years, whereas the back-end tight end 1 guys, it's a really, really strong year for them. So that's like a draft. It's a fallacy. A lot of years, it's like that's not the area you want to attack. It's sort of the dead zone for tight ends. This year, it could be live.
It flips because usually it's that year's that usually that group is filled with guys that are that somebody got hurt and that's why they got boosted, right? Somebody that's clearly a third target on their team. Usually it's guys like Dallas Goedert and Jake Ferguson in that range, but this year I like the guys in that range. And I will say, because of the way things are shaping out, one of our stats is at risk here, Theo. Every year for 8 years now, a tight end's come from outside the top 15 in ADP to finish top 5. Yes.
Every year.
Last year it was Jonnu Smith, came from way downtown.
Yep.
But Jonnu Smith finished as a top 2 target on his team. You know, injuries helped out a little bit. The wrist for Tyreek, Waddle always dealing with something, but hey, he got there. That's after that range. That's where you got to. I encourage you, use your imagination. Look around and say who could be a top 2 target on the team, or at the very least, where is it highly consolidated? The way that the 49ers are, the way that the way that the Dolphins are. I mean, I'll tell you this, Theo. How high are we going to rank Elijah Arroyo if Noah Fant gets cut? Right, because that's the same scheme that created Jonnu Smith, that created George Kittle. And if he doesn't get cut, I mean, you know, Noah Fant runs a 4.5, so I'll quietly throw that out there. But ask yourself, like, where are these consolidated offenses? Where are these guys? I'm looking at Hunter Henry, who, you know, we talked about David Njoku having 97 targets last year. Hunter Henry had 97 targets. Chigakonkwo, why can't he be the second target on his team? Why can't Jatavian Sanders take advantage of this period where Tommy Tremble's got a back surgery? You know, why can't Mason Taylor pop on the Jets? And you know, those are just some names. Use your imagination. Sit down and say who could really push themselves in the top 2 target. Right, that's the game we play. It's been working for us, and we're going to keep doing it.
I like your Hunter Henry call. And I know Henry's a guy that last year when we podcast together, like every week, Henry was a guy that we were constantly talking about on our waiver wire show because he was always available and always in a strong role. But Coop, if you look at the Patriots, like a lot of steam for Kyle Williams right now, a lot of hope for Stephon Diggs to return to really a little bit more than he was in Houston. He was 15 points per game in Houston, but like a higher ADOT role in New England. There's hope for those two guys, but I can avoid both of those guys if building a Drake Maye correlation play or a stack. I can skip both of those guys and I can just go right to Hunter Henry. And Henry, as good an argument as any, it's sort of a way less exciting pick than an Engram or an Njoku, but the same sort of argument that a guy who has minimal wide receiver target competition, and Kyle Williams also could be like a really exciting 85 target player who just gets a lot of like big play looks. Think about like Jameson Williams, Jordan Addison, light in the offense, and they'll get as much out of Diggs as they can. But I think Hunter Henry's in a really good spot.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is another guy who is very good versus man-to-man, always in the top of the league in those type metrics, which translates to the red area. That's why the year before last, when they only threw like 18 touchdowns, he had 6. Like this guy, if this is a better team, he could come out and have 6, 7, 8, 9 touchdowns. I mean, and the year before last, when he had 6, that was the second, tied for second most in the league. Like touchdowns are hard to come by, and guys that can win in man-to-man and in those situations benefit from that. So I think Hunter Henry absolutely could be one of those guys, but that's the move out there. Use your imagination. And all year, as always, I will have my yin and yang tight end rankings in the Fantasy Alarm Draft Guide, and then I'll be updating them in my waiver article every week so that the strategy doesn't end when the season starts. The strategy, we're committing to finding these guys, and we will find them. And I'll tell you what, even in best ball, Theo, last year I took a team to the final day, finished 226th out of 600,000 people. That's the top 1% of the top 1%. My only 2 tight ends that cracked my lineup the entire year were Hunter Henry and Pat Fryman. Those are the only 2 tight ends I had. That combination didn't score fewer than 5 points. Only one game they did, it was week 1. Every other week, more than 5 points from those guys. So like you can get there without drafting an elite tight end if you just do it right and do it at value.
Look for Coop on a tight end centric episode, either here or School of Scott sometime this summer. Check out all of Coop's work over at Fantasy Alarm. Absolute fire every time we get on a podcast together, Coop. And appreciate you going long. I told you 45 minutes. We're at nearly an hour and 20 minutes, but this was a lot of fun today. These 15 players are severely underrated. Take them at ADP. Let's win some titles this year. We're going to crush our fantasy football leagues this year. Stick with us here at Fantasy Points. More episodes like this. Ryan Heath joins me on Dynasty Life. Check out the most recent episode of School of Scott, where Derek Brown of Fantasy Pros, excuse me. I was about to say points, joined us. That show was absolute fire, and we'll see you soon.